Welcome to the Authority File. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. My guest for this series of episodes is Dr. Stella Tikachova, a project manager in the European space industry. She's previously been a project manager for Thales Alenia Space and has managed long-term research projects for the European Commission. She is the author of Emerging Space Markets, published by Springer. She's currently at work on another book and has hosted a Springer Nature video seminar called The Emerging Lunar Economy. Springer Nature is the sponsor of this series. As you can tell from Dr. Tikachova's bio, we'll be talking about space, particularly the fact that it's no longer a Cold War-style race between the US and Russia to be the first to reach some interplanetary milestone. The space market has gone decidedly commercial, as if Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and Richard Branson haven't made that obvious already. Even so, commercial space travel is only the tip of the Martian iceberg. More than simply a check mark on some billionaire's bucket list, the rapidly growing space market has shifted from government agencies to the private sector, with the two now collaborating on developing a diverse economy around habitation and research, lunar construction, satellite manufacturing and servicing, launch services, and who exactly is going to be cleaning up the clouds of space debris floating around up there. And as you can imagine, all of this has had quite an impact on the research and institutional landscape that feeds into the space market. In this second episode, Stella and I talk about the evolution of the space market to a cooperative agreement between government agencies and private companies. I want to go back in time a little bit to see, look a little bit at how we got to where we are, and wondering if you could sort of help us understand the transition from the early space race to today's current space market. I mean, what are the key fundamental changes in the way, for example, governmental and commercial agencies and companies have been supporting and progressing space travel and exploration?
Well, actually, 20 years ago or 25 years ago, you had the traditional way it all worked. So you had the space agencies, they had an announcement of opportunities, and the space companies were manufacturing and winning contracts of the space agencies. And you had always a lot of subcontractors who had a very high rates, and everything was produced only for that space mission.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you had for example, in Europe, it's been more always, I would say, of a collusive oligopoly, because you always have Thales, Alenia Space, and Airbus, let's say. And then you have now, of course, you have OHB, but 20 years ago, they were the big players, most of the people working for them pushing the industry and the innovations and so on. Also, 20 years ago or 25 years ago, it was more the space agencies who were saying, okay, it's us who lead the way for the innovation. But now there is a new trend. So a new trend that the space agencies realize that there are new markets being created. There are customers and profits which could be made, and they could have cost savings. Okay. And they can actually win from this competition and these commercial space markets because they will have very competitive services.
Mm-hmm.
So they would be able to have a few suppliers, like in the case of NASA COTS program, where you have a few companies offering competitive services at the lower prices. So what happened was, in the last years, the space agencies also realized that by creating new programs like COTS, like CCDEF, like the Lunar Catalyst, Next Step, there also in Europe, there is a lot of ESA-ARTES partnership, where you have public-private partnerships, where it's not only the space agency putting money, but actually the industry putting money together in a public-private partnership. It's motivating them and pushing the industry to tap into new markets, to get new customers, to, develop new markets. So now I would say 20 years ago, we were at a very nascent commercial stage of development, commercial space markets. New markets were created, customers were unknown, it was all chaotic, profits were negative. And it was unfamiliar. The markets were unfamiliar to the non-space community. Now, look at the news. I mean, now we're in the frenzied growth. There is market expansion. There are early adopters, all these IT millionaires, as you need, billionaires. It's all changing. Profits are rising. And the most interesting thing is that it's the upstream applications which are growing. So Seraphim Capital, which invests in startups worldwide in space companies, they had a study and they realized that actually there is much more growth in the investment for upstream applications and launchers and launching satellite rather than the downstream.
So it sounds like a fundamental change has been the pursuit of profits. Like this has become an actual commercialized, as you say,
It also is driven by actually the change of the business model, because
yeah.
these new companies, commercial new companies, they change the way of doing business. So it's not so much the technology as much as the business is completely changed, the business model. So they started competing between each other, a lot of these companies, but they also start reduced using, let's say, too many suppliers and subcontractors, which increase their cost, and started producing themselves. For example, certain companies, almost 80 or 90% of their parts of their launchers, in order to control the process and to have much more cost-effective services.
Okay.
So it's actually the business model change.
Right. Can you just help us maybe crystallize the sort of what the market actually is? What are the actual markets that are opening up? Who are the target customers for these markets, and like who's doing the buying and who's doing the selling here? Is it still sort of between governments, government agencies, and private companies, or is it shifting more into the private sector, or how is that working?
It really depends from the market you're looking at. As I mentioned to you earlier, before we started the discussion, there are many different sub segments of the market.
Mm-hmm.
But for example, let's take space debris, for example.
Right.
I think that's a good one to start looking at the space debris one and on orbit satellite servicing. So the space debris one and the active space debris one is an emerging market. And there is a demand from space agencies, which are institutional, satellite operators, which are commercial. Probably in the future, there will be insurance companies and payload owners. Okay. On the other hand, this is a market where there are already companies which are providing active debris removal services. They're trying to provide commercial space traffic services, companies which are developing, let's say, different algorithms to predict which satellite is in what trajectory and so on. So, for example, in the space debris market, if you look at it, there will be spacecraft inspection, collision avoidance, spacecraft removal. Then you'd have an orbit satellite servicing. But for spacecraft removal, for now, it's only space agencies paying for the services. But on orbit satellite servicing, that's another goal, because this is a market where it's growing. And for example, it's estimated from a report from NCR that it will grow by life extension services for on-orbit servicing, refueling satellites, and so on. By 2030, it might become a 3.2 billion market opportunity. And you can already see with the MEF1 and MEF2, this is commercial. It's actually driven by commercial satellite operator like Indosat. They're doing trade-off studies, and they're taking a risk by, let's say, extending the lifetime of their satellite, but they're seeing the benefit. This is one of the areas which I think will actually grow and develop fully, especially for geostationary satellites.
Right.
The second example is the in situ resource utilization industry, which is for the lunar mining, the so-called lunar mining. This is an industry where the Luxembourg Space Agency, for example, they issued a study where it's expected that by 2045, their market revenues of 73 to 170 billion euros by 2045, and technology spillover benefits 2.5 billion euros for over a 50-year period. So, but there, don't forget that a lot of the companies which are working on this in situ resource utilization project, they're also looking at Earth-based customers. So already thinking at customer requirements and so on. So
Okay.
these are the two markets which I think are, let's say, just some examples.
Yep. Excellent. So I have to say, and maybe it's just me, you're mentioning sort of the potential size in dollars of some of these market segments, and billions. It just sounds small to me. I don't know why. You think about space travel and space technology that would cost, the cost of supporting that and actually executing on that would be in closer to the trillions. But maybe that's, I don't know. Maybe realistically, it's a $1 billion market rather than a $1 trillion market.
Well, it depends what you're looking at. So that's why I'm saying, I mean, there are different studies talking about, let's say, the overall value of the space industry. For example, in 2018 or 17 was 238 billion euros. Okay.
Okay.
That's counting the satellite, the downstream and the upstream. I'm talking about the upstream now.
Yep.
And
okay.
it's a different type of, how do you say, the upstream. It's not so easy to make money.
Okay. So Stella, I can't help but ask, mainly because as we're recording this, it's the day after Jeff Bezos made his trip into space, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the relation between sort of this touristy space travel, quote unquote, market versus what we've been talking about up to this point. The kind of travel that, Bezos and other billionaires are interested in doing, what SpaceX is doing, what Blue Origin is about. How does that relate to what's actually happening in the space market? Is tourism a viable business, or is it sort of just this exciting sideshow to what's really going on?
Well, actually, space tourism, just like 15 years ago or 16, even more, was, let's say, one of the major markets, which was considered to be one of the major drivers behind the commercial space markets. And in 2004, even Virgin Galactic already announced that by 2012, there will be suborbital flights. And there was, let's say, the rush for the space tourism to develop. However, when we speak about space tourism, let's not forget that there was already first attempts by the Russians in 1991 by launching the first space journalists, Japanese journalists on board the Mir station. Later on, we know Denis Tito, there have been 6 or 7 space tourists to the space station, Mark Shuttleworth, and so on. However, space tourism is a very difficult to make it self-sustainable, to create a long-term self-sustainable market. When we talk about space tourism, we have to understand that there are three markets. There is the suborbital, which is to the border to up to 100 kilometers, where, as you recently read about Branson flying on the spaceship too.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have the orbital of Jeff Bezos flying above the 100 kilometers.
Right.
And in the future, you would have, of course, with SpaceX, with Starship, with the Japanese millionaire making a lunar flyby. But I personally believe that space tourism is a very clever marketing and promotion tool used by a lot of space companies, because having a long-term sustainable market and actually will be extremely difficult, because space tourism is not so safe as we're used with flights of airplanes, aviation industry. And the problem is that only one accident might completely destroy this market.
Right.
So personally, I think it's a attractive market, interesting one, but I don't think it has a very strong long-term, let's say at present, a long-term future. Maybe it would have once we have much more reliable launchers and technologies, and we have made hundreds and hundreds of commercial flights, either in suborbital or orbital, or when we have, there will be a commercial space station called Axiom, which will fly also commercial astronauts. So once you have 50 or 40 or even more commercial astronauts, then we can talk about having a long-term commercial sustainable space tourism industry. But for now, I think it's still a bit of a risky way. But let me give you an example. Virgin Galactic, they started with talking about Spaceship 1 and 2 and having space tourism, but actually they very, very well diversified their business, and they created the Launcher 1, launching SMOSA in space. So that's why I'm saying it's a great, let's say, it's an extremely attractive market, but I'm not sure, at least in the next 5 or 10 years, to be able to generate enough profit or be enough sustainable for the companies.
You just heard from Dr. Stella Tikachova, an author and project manager in the European space industry. Springer Nature is the sponsor of this series. Join us next week as we get an international perspective on space exploration and travel, who the major players are, and what lunar exploits are still there for the taking.
There will be probably lunar habitats in a few years. There are already a number of companies building lunar rovers and robots. There is already ideas, and there are already technologies being developed for using lunar water for propellant, for performing 3D printing using lunar sand, as in situ resource utilization. But the most interesting market, I think, will be the communication, navigation, lunar communication and navigation services, and the transportation. So this is the one which I think will grow and emerge and will develop really fast.
If you like what you hear, rate us or give us a review on your podcast platform of choice. As always, sponsorship and advertising for the Authority File podcast are handled by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced by Choice's senior digital media producer, Mark Dirks, and digital media assistant, Sabrina Kofer. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.